Britain remembers the Second World War rather well, the Spitfires and the Blitz spirit. Churchill with his cigar and his victory sign. The photographs of families gathered around wireless sets waiting for news. We have turned it into heritage, museums with gift shops, documentaries with stirring music, tea towels printed with "Keep calm and carry on." But beneath the Britain we walk every day lies another country entirely. Scattered across these islands are places where the government built for scenarios too terrible to discuss publicly. Bunkers carved into hillsides and quarries, command centers sunk beneath suburban streets, underground cities designed to preserve something while the population above faced whatever came. I have spent months going through declassified documents and county archives to bring you 15 bunkers where something of those desperate years remains. Some are museums now, others are sealed, others have no official status at all. The concrete is still there. The questions have never been answered. Let us begin with a place that has become part of the official story. The Cabinet War Rooms beneath Westminster. They sit directly below the Treasury building in Whitehall, accessed through an unremarkable door that millions of tourists now queue to enter. Winston Churchill worked here. Decisions that shaped the war were made in these corridors. The map room still has pins marking the positions of forces on the day Japan surrendered. What most visitors do not realize is that the rooms were never designed to survive a direct hit. The ceiling was reinforced with a single layer of steel. Churchill himself knew this. He called the complex the Tomb. His private secretary recorded that Churchill understood perfectly well that a German bomb landing in the right place would bury everyone inside. The air filtration system could not have handled poison gas. The ventilation was barely adequate for the number of bodies working through the night. Staff members worked shifts lasting 18 hours in corridors so narrow that 2 people could barely pass. They did this knowing that the protection above their heads was largely psychological. The clock in the map room stopped at the moment of German surrender, and nobody ever restarted it. It remains frozen at that instant. The war ended and time stopped, and the rooms were sealed. When they were opened decades later for preservation, staff found cups still sitting where they had been placed in August 1945. The war ended, and people simply walked away. Travelling east to Holborn, we find something altogether different. The Kingsway Telephone Exchange lies beneath Chancery Lane, accessed through unmarked doors that give no indication of what waits below. 100 feet beneath the street sits a network of tunnels that most Londoners have never heard of. This was originally one of 8 deep-level shelters built between 1940 and 1942. 2 parallel tunnels stretch over 1,200 feet each. The government told the public these were emergency shelters. What they did not say was that several were immediately requisitioned for other purposes. Kingsway became a government communications centre. After the war, it served as a telephone exchange, operational until 2008. Thousands of workers over those decades descended into tunnels that extended further than any official plan showed. The workers had stories, a persistent hum that was not electrical, cold spots that moved through corridors with no explanation, sections that supervisors told new staff to avoid without ever explaining why. When British Telecom sold the site, the new owners conducted surveys. The results were never published. The tunnels remain sealed, current purpose undisclosed. Every day, tens of thousands of Londoners walk directly above this infrastructure without any idea it exists. The entrance doors remain unmarked. No plaques, no heritage signs, just locked doors and silence. Moving northwest to Liverpool, we reach a bunker that controlled the most important battle Britain ever fought. The Western Approaches Command beneath Derby House determined whether Britain would survive. This was the headquarters for the Battle of the Atlantic. Every convoy crossing from America was plotted here. Every U-boat position was tracked. Every decision about which ships to protect and which to sacrifice was made in these underground rooms. Over 1,000 personnel worked here at peak operations. The plotting room contained a vast map table where wrens moved markers representing ships. When a convoy reported contact with submarines, the room went quiet. When a convoy went dark and contact was lost, the silence became unbearable. Each pin removed from that map represented hundreds of drowned men. Merchant sailors who volunteered for the most dangerous work in the war. The staff plotting their movements knew the survival rates. They knew that many ships would never arrive. They did the work anyway because someone had to, and because the alternative was Britain starving. Former Wrens who served here spoke of hearing things in the tunnels, ship horns echoing through corridors that had no connection to the docks above. Nobody could explain it. Nobody tried. They noted it and continued working. The concrete still carries a particular smell, oil and paper and something harder to name. Something that might be anxiety preserved in the walls. On the Kent coast at Dover, we find tunnels that changed the course of the war in 9 days. Now, the passages beneath Dover Castle are medieval in origin, but they were expanded and reinforced from 1938. Within those chalk cliffs, Vice Admiral Bertram Ramsay planned and coordinated Operation Dynamo, the evacuation of Dunkirk. 338,226 men were rescued from the beaches of France between the 26th of May and the 4th of June 1940. The little ships and the destroyers and the fishing boats, the soldiers wading into the water, all of it coordinated from tunnels carved into white cliffs. Ramsay worked from a room with a telephone that connected him to every vessel in the channel. He made decisions about which beaches to prioritize, which ships to send into the heaviest fire, which men could be saved and which could not. The tunnels extend 3 levels into the chalk. A hospital section treated the wounded from Dunkirk in underground wards where daylight never reached. Staff who worked through the evacuation did not see the sun for days. They slept on cots in corridors and returned to plotting tables and continued making decisions that sent men to live or die. Modern visitors to the preserved sections report cold spots in the hospital wing. No draft, no explanation, just cold where there should be warmth. Those tunnels at Dover were built to save men from the sea. But other bunkers across Britain were built for darker purposes. Not rescue, but survival of government, while the population above faced whatever came. In Neasden, of all places, beneath what was once a post office research station on Brook Road, lies a bunker that even Winston Churchill found unbearable. The facility code named Paddock was built between 1938 and 1940 as an alternative cabinet war rooms. 2 floors extending 40 feet below ground. Capacity for 200 staff. Direct communication links to every centre of power. The cabinet met here exactly twice in 1940. Then Churchill refused to return. He called it the Burrow. His personal notes describe feeling buried alive. Something about the space disturbed him in ways the cabinet war rooms did not. Paddock was abandoned almost immediately. The bunker remained sealed for decades. Local residents reported hearing generators running throughout the 1950s. Officially, the site was decommissioned. The access tunnel reportedly collapsed in the 1970s. What ceiling sections that have never been reopened. What Churchill sensed in that bunker remains undiscussed in official records. He was not a man who frightened easily. He led a nation through years of bombardment. Yet something about Paddock made him refuse to enter after just 2 visits. The building above was partially demolished. The entrance is blocked. Whatever remains beneath Brook Road has not been documented since. Travelling southeast to Ramsgate, we find what happened when an entire town went underground. Over 3 miles of tunnels run beneath this Kent seaside town. Capacity for 60,000 people, the entire population. Railway tunnels and purpose-built shelters combined into the longest continuous air raid shelter system in Britain. Families lived in these tunnels during heavy raids, not for hours, but for days and weeks. Children were born underground, electric lighting and sanitation and bunks in endless rows. The living and the dead carried through the same passages. When bombing was heaviest, the tunnels became a subterranean town. People ate and slept and argued and fell in love 100 feet below the streets. After the war sections were bricked up without full clearance. Council records from 1945 reference sealed sections with contents undocumented. Modern urban explorers who have accessed restricted areas report finding personal effects. Shoes, spectacles, toys. Objects that suggest not everyone retrieved what they had brought down during the raids. Local legend persists that some areas contain wartime remains never recovered. The council denies this. The sections remain sealed. The records remain incomplete. Similar scenes played out in Stockport, where 1 mile of tunnels were cut into natural sandstone beneath the town centre. The shelters could hold 6,500 people. bunks and toilets and canteens and first aid posts carved into rock that had formed millions of years before humans existed. The tunnels follow the natural sandstone, irregular organic shapes that make them easy to become disoriented, even with modern lighting. Sections remain closed to the public. Structural concerns are cited, but local historians who have examined the documentation question whether structure is the real issue. Air quality in the deeper sections remains problematic. Something in the rock. Warden's logs from 1940 and 1941 reference disturbances that were never fully explained. The language is careful. British understatement. But between the lines, something troubled the men and women responsible for those tunnels. They noted it and continued their duties. The specific cold of deep sandstone is different from concrete. It feels older, more permanent. The rock was there before we arrived, and will be there long after we have gone. Sheltering within it during the worst nights of the Blitz must have felt like returning to the earth itself. Beneath Blakeshall Common in Worcestershire lies something altogether larger. Drakelow tunnels extend 3.5 miles into the hillside near Kidderminster, excavated between 1941 and 1942 as a shadow factory. The Bristol Aeroplane Company and Rover operated here, producing aircraft engine parts far from German bombs. 700 workers at peak production. They descended each morning into tunnels that maintained constant temperature and humidity, perfect conditions for precision engineering, perfect conditions for preservation of things beyond machinery. Accidents occurred during construction. Numbers were never officially confirmed. The tunnels were sealed, and the work continued, and the dead remained where they had fallen. This was wartime. Production mattered more than individual accounting. After the war, Drakelow was converted to a regional seat of government, a place where local authorities would coordinate response to nuclear attack. Decommissioned in 1993, now privately owned. Equipment remains in place. Lathes and benches positioned as if workers simply stepped away for lunch and never returned. A former Cold War staff report hearing machinery running in sealed sections. Documented paranormal investigations have recorded unexplained sounds. Multiple visitors over the years have experienced acute anxiety with no apparent cause. Not fear, exactly. Something more specific. The sense that the tunnels retain something of their purpose, that the work being done there somehow continues. Drakelow was built to keep production running while the world above burned, but some bunkers were built for purposes stranger still. Not to make weapons, but to preserve something more valuable than machines. Deep in Snowdonia, within a slate quarry near Blaenau Festiniog, the government hid the entire collection of the National Gallery. Over 1,800 paintings, including works by Rembrandt and Vermeer and Turner. The quarry was converted between 1940 and 1941. Temperature and humidity controlled. Security absolute. The paintings were considered more valuable than the people guarding them. Staff lived in the quarry for months at a time, sleeping beside masterpieces in caverns carved from Welsh slate. The specific silence of such a space absorbs all sound. Staff reports from the period describe the weight of responsibility, guarding civilization itself while civilization burned outside. The paintings remained until 1945. Some were reportedly never quite the same after years in darkness. Experts dispute this. The records are incomplete. The quarry returned to private ownership after the war. Today, sections are abandoned and flooded. The gallery chambers are inaccessible. What remains down there has never been fully documented. We protected our art in the earth. We judged Rembrandt and Turner worth saving. We made choices about what mattered enough to hide underground while people sheltered in tube stations and basements. Those choices tell us something about what we valued. The answers are uncomfortable. Crossing to Scotland, we reach the Anstruther secret bunker in Fife. It sits beneath farmland near St Andrews. Originally RAF Troywood, a Second World War radar station, it was converted between 1951 and 1993 to a regional seat of government. 24,000 square feet over 2 levels. Capacity for 300 staff. The entrance is disguised as an ordinary farmhouse. A building that appears to be a modest agricultural structure is actually the gateway to a nuclear command center. Nothing on the surface indicates what lies beneath. No signs, no security visible. Just a farmhouse with unremarkable windows and a door that leads underground. This was where regional government would have coordinated response to nuclear attack on Scotland. Staff would have lived underground while the population above died. The communication equipment still works, tested regularly. The dormitories still have bunks made up, as if waiting for occupants. Former staff speak of drills that simulated the death of millions, sitting in underground rooms, receiving reports of fictional devastation. Edinburgh destroyed, Glasgow destroyed, updating charts and maintaining communications and preparing to govern whatever survived. The psychological toll of such work has never been fully acknowledged. The bunker is now a museum, but deeper sections remain closed. Maintenance is cited as the reason. The closure has continued since 2010. What those deeper sections contain has not been disclosed. South of London in Essex, beneath the village of Kelvedon Hatch, lies another bunker built for apocalypse. The entrance is a bungalow, completely ordinary. Pebble dash walls and net curtains and a front garden. Behind the facade, a tunnel descends 100 meters into a hillside. This was a regional government headquarters for London in the event of nuclear war. Built between 1952 and 1953. 3 stories deep. Capacity for 600 military and civilian personnel. Decommissioned in 1994. The equipment remains operational. The BBC studio could broadcast tomorrow if needed. The Prime Minister Communications Suite, where orders would have been given to a devastated nation, is preserved exactly as it was. Charts showing projected casualty figures. Communications protocols. Contingency plans. The decontamination area was designed to strip radiation from survivors. The assumption being that anyone reaching the bunker would have passed through fallout. They would have to be cleaned before entering. Their clothes would have to be destroyed. Their hair might have to be removed. Medical staff would make assessments. Not everyone decontaminated would necessarily have been allowed inside. Modern visitors report acute discomfort in the lower levels, the specific weight of planning for apocalypse, the matter-of-fact documentation of expected deaths. No graves were included in the plans. No provision for the dead. They were not expected to reach the bunker. The 600 inside would live. The millions outside would not. The maths was understood by everyone involved. The Hack Green bunker near Nantwich in Cheshire tells a similar story. Originally a Second World War radar station, converted to a regional government headquarters in 1976. 35,000 square feet. Semi-underground construction. Part of a network of regional bunkers that covered Britain. This facility was operational during the Falklands War and the First Gulf War. Staff drilled regularly for nuclear scenarios. The Government Situation Report Boards still display exercise data. Numbers representing fictional dead, or areas marked as uninhabitable. Resources calculated for survivors. Medical facilities included a morgue. Capacity suggests planners expected casualties, even among sheltered staff. Radiation, psychological breakdown, violence. The contingencies were documented. Former staff speak of the psychological toll. Planning the end of civilization as a routine administrative exercise. Updating projections, filing reports. Maintaining equipment that would only be used if everything else had failed. They built these places. They staffed them. They made plans we were never told about. The assumption throughout was that government would continue. Authority would be maintained. Orders would be given and followed. What remained of Britain would be governed from underground. Beneath the Wiltshire countryside lies something far larger than any regional bunker. The Box Mine complex near Corsham sits within Bath stone quarries that extend for miles, converted between 1940 and 1943 for aircraft engine production. Over 2 million square feet of underground space. The Bristol Aeroplane Company operated here throughout the war, Workers descended each morning into artificial lighting that mimicked daylight. They worked shifts in tunnels where natural light never penetrated. Some sections remained artificially lit for years. The constant temperature preserved machinery perfectly. The effect on workers was less well documented. Accident rates were higher than in surface factories. Cramped conditions. Poor ventilation despite the industrial scale. The bodies reportedly never recovered from collapsed sections. The tunnels were simply sealed and work continued elsewhere. Wartime necessity required such decisions. After the war, sections were converted to government storage. Other sections were simply abandoned. The Ministry of Defense controls significant portions. What remains in the sealed sections has never been publicly documented. Local residents report hearing machinery at night. Officially impossible. The reports persist. In the heart of London, adjacent to Horse Guards Parade, sits a building millions of tourists photograph without understanding what they are looking at. The Citadel was built between 1940 and 1941. Reinforced concrete walls, 30 feet thick in places. Deliberately brutal architecture. The Admiralty communications and operational headquarters throughout the war. The structure has no windows. It is entirely sealed, covered in creeping vines that were planted deliberately to disguise it from aerial reconnaissance, but which give it an appearance of organic growth, as if the building is slowly being absorbed by vegetation, or as if something within is slowly reaching outward. The interior has never been photographed for public record. Tunnels connect to Whitehall and Downing Street, possibly to Buckingham Palace. The documentation remains classified. Former staff described the interior as disorienting, corridors that do not follow logical patterns, rooms whose purpose was never explained to those who worked in them. The building appears to have settled into the earth, or perhaps extended into it. What lies beneath street level has never been disclosed. The Citadel remains fully operational. Royal Navy headquarters. Nobody outside the service knows what happens inside. Tourists photograph the vines and post images to social media and walk away. The building watches them go. We come now to the place that represents the culmination of everything Britain built in preparation for war it hoped would never come. Beneath Corsham in Wiltshire, 100 feet below ground, lies an underground city. Codenames included Burlington and Turnstile and Subterfuge. Construction began in the 1950s using former quarry workings. 35 acres of underground space, one of the largest bunkers in the world, designed to house 4,000 people, the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, senior civil servants, military leadership, the apparatus of state preserved while everything above was destroyed, self-contained with its own water supply, generators, hospital, telephone exchange, BBC studio, even an underground pub called the Rose and Crown. The capacity was 4,000. The population of Britain was 50 million. The selection criteria for who would be saved were never published. We can assume, we can guess, but we were never told who would have been chosen and who would have been left. Staff would have left their families to face nuclear war alone. No families were included in the plans. Husbands and wives would say goodbye and descend underground while those they loved remained above to face whatever came. The psychological implications were understood, hence the pub, hence the hospital psychiatric facilities. They anticipated the mental cost of surviving while everyone else died. Food supplies were stockpiled for 3 months. After 3 months, no plans were documented. Either recovery would have begun, or it would not have. Either survivors would emerge, or they would remain underground indefinitely. The planning stopped at 12 weeks. The complex remains intact. The generators could be restarted. The water still flows. Current status is sealed and guarded. Ministry of Defense property. Journalists who attempted to enter in 2010 were arrested. The charges were later dropped, but the point was made. This is not heritage. This is not tourism. This remains operational in some sense that has never been explained. The lights were turned off in 2004 when the facility was declassified. But declassified does not mean disclosed. The files released contained little of substance. The infrastructure remains, maintained, guarded, waiting. These 15 places are real. The concrete is still there. Some are museums now where school children file through corridors built for apocalypse. Others remain sealed. Others have no official status at all. The plans made in these bunkers affected millions who never knew they existed. Decisions about convoy routes. Decisions about who would govern after nuclear war. Decisions about what art was worth preserving and what communities could be sacrificed. The infrastructure of secrecy built during the Second World War became the infrastructure of secrecy during the Cold War. Some of it remains operational. We are not told what for. What strikes me most about these places is not their scale or their secrecy. It is the ordinary people who worked in them. The Wrens plotting convoys in Liverpool, who knew each pin represented lives. The telephone operators in Kingsway, who descended daily into tunnels that extended beyond any map. The civil servants at Burlington, who rehearsed governing a dead nation. These were not soldiers or spies. They were clerks and typists and engineers who carried the weight of impossible knowledge. They went home each evening to families who could not be told. They ate dinner and helped children with homework and lay awake knowing things that would have terrified their neighbors. The Official Secrets Act bound them to silence. Many went to their graves without ever speaking of what they had seen or what they had been asked to plan. Their children and grandchildren live among us now. Some have found letters after funerals, references to places that did not officially exist, hints at work that could never be discussed. The generation that staffed these bunkers is passing. Their testimony disappears with them. What they knew becomes rumor and then legend and then nothing at all. The bunkers remain, but the human memory fades. Soon there will be no one left who remembers what it felt like to descend those stairs each morning. No one who can describe the particular quality of underground air or the sound of generators running through the night. The infrastructure will outlast everyone who gave it meaning. If you have visited these places, if you worked in them, if your parents or grandparents descended into those tunnels each day and emerged each evening without ever explaining where they had been, the testimonies from those who lived this history matter more than any archive. The bunkers remain. The questions remain. The sealed doors and the ventilation shafts and the tunnels that extend further than any map shows. All of it beneath the streets we walk every day, beneath the fields where children play, beneath the ordinary. The entrance to Burlington, the sign that says Ministry of Defence property and no access, the ventilation shafts that still emerge in farmers' fields, the infrastructure of apocalypse maintained and waiting beneath the Wiltshire countryside.